Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. As always, I'm joined by my co-host.
Simon.
That's your cue, Simon. And today we have a guest. His name is Simon Pryor. Simon, do you want to talk a bit about who you are and how we met?
Hello. Yes. So I'm Simon. I am a senior test manager at EasyJet in the UK. I'm also a co-host of the Testing Peers podcast, and I met Nicole through the Ministry of Testing virtual coffee channel, and whatever it was I said in that conversation, she decided it was a good idea to get me on the show. So we'll go from there.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. I don't know exactly what you said, but I just thought we need to have this guy on. Simon, you should definitely join that. If anybody is watching and hasn't signed up, I really enjoy it. There's a community called the Ministry of Testing, and I love their virtual coffee channel where you go in and you get paired every week with a random person who's also in the channel. And I've met quite a few cool people just by joining.
Okay, so is that a way to go about it? That you just join the Slack channel virtual coffee and
yeah, I mean, if you join the Ministry of Testing Slack and then join the Slack channel virtual coffee, and then unless you set there's a little app called Donut which is used in the channel, and it randomly pairs people each week, and you get a notification when your new person's up, and then you get a check-in on the Monday before the next pairing happens again to ask whether you met up with your pairing. And what usually happens is you just book a half-hour slot or an hour slot to chat with them at some point during your working week. It's really good. I've met loads of interesting people since the pandemic started.
Awesome. So it sounds like it's something even I should be able to.
It's good fun
to do.
There's a little competition running at the moment as well between the 4 Testing Peers hosts because people are saying how many of the Testing Peers hosts they've knocked off as far as had conversations with. So there's a few people that have sort of met 2 of us on virtual coffee, but not all 4 of us yet. I think one person, Hannah Denbrandt's the first person that's met all 4 of us through the virtual coffee, and there's almost a leaderboard now of who's got all 4, who's only got 3, 2, etc. So yeah.
Well, for those who don't know, what is Testing Peers?
Yes, so Testing Peers is a podcast that we started last May. There's 4 of us: myself, Chris Armstrong, Russell Cracksford, and David Maynard. We're all in test lead positions or head of test positions or senior sort of leadership positions within QA. And we've just decided that we've been talking over Slack for about 2-3 years. We've got our own Slack group. It started just the 4 of us. There's now about 10 people in there. But we started talking about we were going to do a blog between the 4 of us, or we'd do something like that. And then I pushed the idea of a podcast. I love podcasts. My podcast playlist is about 30 or 40 episodes long that I'm trying to catch up on because I just subscribe to so many. But yeah, I was like, let's do a podcast. We've got a unique pitch here that we could make work. Coming from a leadership perspective within testing, I thought it'd be useful. So it's just the 4 of us. We meet every Wednesday evening. Usually with a couple of beers. We spend an hour recording an episode on a topic either leadership related or testing related, and then we release every couple of weeks. So it's good fun. It's been my social outlet for the last 1.5 years, so it's been useful to have those conversations with people in an evening. But yeah, no, it's really good. We've just reached 6,000 downloads as well after 25 episodes. So yeah, it's going pretty well. So testingpeers.com is where it is.
Okay, it's actually in the description, but I will also type it in the chat. Oh, or Sim is faster. Clearly. I was typing the HTTPS part, so not complete.
But that is actually interesting. You say you listen to a lot of podcasts. Do you have any other podcast recommendations for people into QA or testing that you'd like to?
The ones I enjoy the most really are, there's one called The Guilty Tester,
I was just going to mention
So,
that.
Dave Duke's podcast, the Guilty Tester one's a good one. There's Tester Island Discs, which is a Ministry of Testing one. I've been a guest on that myself, where you basically talk about your topics of conversation, but you also choose 5 songs you take to a desert island. So that's a bit like so you get to choose 5 songs, cool. You take it to the episode and talk about the songs as well. So that was good fun. Quality Sense, that's another one that I enjoy listening to. And there's a couple of other, I can't think of the others now. My mind's gone blank. But yeah, there's a lot in the QA world podcast wise.
Awesome. Thanks for the recommendations. I'll definitely check them out.
So I think Simon has a presentation for us about creating a culture of quality. But before that, Simon, should we do the announcements?
Yes, we have a little announcement. Nothing revolutionary, but Bintray, which we've used as our static asset provider or our binary provider, they have recently decided to sunset their service. So starting right now, something happened to Simon, but I hope he will be back really soon. In any case, starting right now, basically everyone that depends on, for instance, apt or DNF or Yum, for instance, to install their K6 packages, make sure to check out k6io/docs getting started installation, because the keys will be new, and in some cases you'll also have to change the actual download server. So links are down there. Make sure to have a read and update your CI so you don't have any downtime in your performance testing efforts. That's
something that unfortunately we didn't have much of a choice on because we didn't get much notice from Bintray either. That's really about it. Simon, you want to start up?
Yeah, I can do. I'll get my screen sharing.
I think we talked a little bit about this during the virtual coffee as well.
Yes, I think you're right. I think we did.
And you started to launch into your whole spiel, and I was like, yeah, I want to capture this.
So let me know if you can see when you can see my screen, and we'll.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. If I go full screen, then.
We don't see the full screen version. Okay, now we do.
Now you do? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I won't. I'll go through this. It's a presentation that I've given at a few international conferences and meetups recently, and also some internal company communities as well. I basically, I'll just start going through it. But the first slide is really about me. A bit more detail about the about what I'm doing. So as we mentioned, that's me and my little family, my 2 boys and my wife. As I mentioned, I work for EasyJet. I'm a host of the MOT Buckinghamshire meetups. We've been virtual for the last year or so. Been running events every month. We've had people like Lisa Crispin and Parveen Khan and a few other really good speakers talk at our events. I've done quite a few conference talks recently as well. Obviously, they've all been virtual for the last year, but before that, I was just starting to make my conference speaking journey. I'm a mental health first aider. I'm a STEM ambassador as well, so I enjoy going out to schools and talking about testing and trying and encouraging people into that industry. It's a passion of mine to really try and improve the pathway for students and graduates to get into testing roles, because at the moment very little is taught in universities, and I have a hashtag Make a Tester, which I've been running for the last 4 years, which I'm revamping this year with the help of my podcast co-hosts to talk more about and get out to universities and try and improve the pool of talent coming out of universities into testing roles. I'm also an advocate for neurodiversity. I have autism in my family, and it's really encouraged me to try and push further to try and make sure that our workplaces are accessible for those with neurodiverse conditions such as autism, ADHD. And then, as we've already talked about, the Testing Peers podcast is probably one of my proudest achievements outside of work. I really feel like we're making tracks in spreading the word of all the good things in the testing world. So my context. So before I dive into this, then really this came about because in the last couple of roles I've had, I've worked in quite before this one, I've worked in quite waterfally places where agile has been paid lip service to but not really followed. We might have the sprints, but we don't really follow the true principles of agile. We'll have the ceremonies, etc., but that's about it. I always felt that testing was left till the end and not really given its true place. So that's where I came about building this culture of quality and how we change that dynamic within organizations. So, but before I start that, I've got a question for you both. What is quality?
That's such a broad
such
question.
an easy question.
Yeah.
I think quality is what you make of it. I think there's a reason that we usually start with requirements, and it's because depending on your requirements, the same piece of work might be junk for one person and exactly what another person wanted.
Yeah, that is true.
Like that. At the same time, I'd like to take it a bit further and say that quality is something as well that is actually disconnected from both requirements and whatever we decide to build, and something that is universally a universal thing, right? Because you can decide to build something that is of low quality. You can decide to cheap out and don't do any quality improving efforts and still hit the requirements without it being of high quality.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely true.
I also think, though, that sometimes in trying to get to that point of objective quality, that a lot of teams end up putting more and more features in, and nobody really steps back and says, wait, do we actually need these features? Are we addressing the needs of our audience or our users? Because I would also say that something that is super functional or has a lot of features might still not be functional for the audience that we have. And
Definitely.
so there's really also a subjective quality to it inherently.
There absolutely is. Yeah, totally agree. That it has to mean something to someone. That's what quality comes down to. So this is my definition.
And now you're going to show us up.
So, well, I don't know about that. So the measure of whether the software meets the explicit and implicit needs of the customer and their ability to use it successfully. And
no wonder we got along.
the way I look at it, and I think, Nicole, I might have mentioned this when we spoke on the virtual coffee, is the way I look at quality is I've put it to businesses before, like senior management and stuff, is would we rather have an app that is, all the features are perfectly developed, there's no bugs, but no customer uses it, or every customer hates using it? Or would we prefer to have an app that's has loads of bugs, it's really buggy, but the customers absolutely love it and they go back to it time and time again? Technically, they could both be perceived as being of good quality, even though there's bugs in one of them because of the customer use. So which one would you say is the higher quality?
Oh, is that a real question?
It was a question. Yeah. What's your thoughts?
Sorry,
which one would you perceive?
Definitely the one that meets the needs.
Yeah.
You have to give people what they're asking for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. And you'd be surprised how many PMs and senior stakeholders, when you give them that choice, the amount that will naturally go to the bug-free one. before they then realize that the customer doesn't really like it. And then it's like, oh, okay, but why would they like it if it's got so many bugs in it? Well, the bugs don't necessarily mean they're massive issues that are blocking them using it. They're issues that the customer's willing to go around because they enjoy using the app.
It's also the Pareto principle too, right? The 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
I don't think a tester's goal is to have absolutely no bugs in production.
Absolutely.
I think it's to address the most pressing ones.
Yeah. Agreed. So then what about a culture of quality? What does that mean?
I think for me, it would be a company culture where I'm not the only one who cares about quality. And I think that a tester's role is not to be the only person championing quality, but it's more about helping the rest of the organization formalize practices that improve quality. But I really hate when I'm the only one who's like, but wait, have we put in enough of an estimate for testing this bit of work? Or I don't like when I'm the only one that does that. I like when developers are writing unit tests already, and from start to finish, people are thinking, who's going to use this? How's it going to be used? That I think that's a more healthy company culture in general. What about you, Sime?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think about, I really hate this phrase, but some talk about customer obsession, right? And being obsessed with making the customer happy. To some extent, or I really hate that expression, but to some extent that really binds into what you were saying earlier, as well as how you could think about cultural quality. Do we really have a common culture where we think about what the customer wants and what makes them happy?
True. Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of links in nicely to what I've said here. It's kind of that cross-team focus. So it's not, like you say, it's not just one person. It's everyone has that same focus of making sure they're delivering the high-quality software that meets the customer's needs. It's one of the highest priorities, and all of our practices within our organization support that as well. So the whole focus is on that alongside the other priorities. So really then once you've sort of got the basis of what you're trying to achieve, my first step then is, we need to have a vision. We need to know where we're going to. And that's where I come up with this term. Well, I haven't come up with this term, but I'm using this term, defining your quality narrative. Now, I don't know if either of you have read the book Leading Quality by Ronald Cummings-Jong and Oase Peer.
No.
If not, I definitely recommend it. It's a book.
Leading Quality. Okay.
Leading Quality. Have I got it here? I've got it here. So I'll flash it. I don't know if you can see my screen, but I've seen my picture,
like a dead tree book.
Yeah, an actual book. There is an online copy. There is an audio book as well.
And the Kindle version I've just found.
Of course, yeah. How great leaders deliver high quality software and accelerate growth. They've basically put together, they've spoken to business leaders and said, okay, how do we make quality a focus point? And they've taken lots of input from lots of industry leaders to try and build this thing of how you can build quality into an organization's culture. So yeah, it's a really good read. Ron Cummings-Jong, one of the authors, he's done the audiobook as well, and he's such an engaging speaker. So you'll enjoy listening to his anecdotes while he reads through the book, because he doesn't stick to script at all. So it's a good listen, definitely. So yeah, quality narrative for me, it's about it basically is the vision that you aim for. But another question for you: are there any common misconceptions around testing and QA that you've come across? I've listed a few there on the slide, but are there any that really have bugged you over the years?
Oh, that's so good. The QA want to break software. Oh yeah, I hear that a lot. There's like these sort of statements kind of pit developers and testers against each other.
Yeah, they do. Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
good guy, bad guy kind of thing. When the reality is we're all working together.
Yeah.
It's not, when I find a bug, I'm not like, yeah, I proved you wrong. I'm more like, yes, I'm glad I found this before like a customer did.
Yeah. Agreed.
Testing should only be done by QA is a common one that I usually
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that links into the one that really grates me at the bottom there, that we're the ones that are solely responsible for quality. We're the gatekeepers. We're, nothing can go live without our input, etc., etc. It's absolutely.
What about the misconception that testers never fix bugs or shouldn't fix bugs?
Yeah.
Because I think that if you can, and really you should have access to the code base as well. But if you can, why not? You're not, because I think otherwise testing is just about pointing the finger and then you don't do anything about it. But why not? If you can, you should as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's comes down to that shared ownership, doesn't it? And if we're saying that testing's not our own responsibility, then why shouldn't we be allowed to be involved in helping fix and improve the quality of the software in other means by absolutely helping with the defect fixes or adding our inputs to code reviews, etc., etc. Definitely.
Also, QA is always standing in the way, trying to delay our releases.
Yeah, the bottleneck. Absolutely. I'll actually come on to that in a minute as well. Yeah, definitely. So I've been in the industry 13 years now, and it's amazing how many of these you still come across every day, where people don't quite understand what your role really is about, and just expect all you do is execute tests. And there's the whole misconception now around, there's no longer a need for a test manager because we're all agile and everyone's working collaboratively. But again, roles need to evolve, and I definitely think there's a need for someone to be that testing coach, testing mentor for the remaining testers in the teams, etc., etc. So there's definitely a lot of misconceptions around our trade for some reason. So when it comes to defining that quality narrative, it really comes down to how you want quality to be perceived within your organization. Understanding where it is currently, and then understanding where you want to get to. So questions along the lines of who's perceived to own quality at the moment, how is the testing done, what value does the testing provide? These all kind of help build up this picture of where it is now, and then take the utopian view of how do you want it to be perceived? Can you identify ways in which it will be the value will be visible? And is quality seen at that level that it needs to be at? So you can build those two pictures out. You basically end up with a journey between where we are now, where we want to get to. And then you can go on to, I'll talk about, what that journey might look like in a second. But just an example, and I don't know whether I'm putting you two on the spot, whether you two can think of any examples for this as well. But one example of one of my previous roles where it was perceived in a certain way, QA were seen as the gatekeepers of quality. This was a highly waterfally company. We had a big team of manual testers, very little automation, and I joined, and we were seen as the gatekeepers of production. So nothing could go into production unless we've done our testing on it. But our testing cycles were 4, 5, 6 weeks, depending on the project. Thousands of manual test cases being executed by a team of 15 or 20 testers at any one point. We only got engaged at projects once the code had been developed, so there was no interaction with the test team before then, so we weren't able to get involved early to see how things could be built in a more productive way. And we were really seen as a regulatory requirement rather than adding any real value to the software. It was a tick in the box, effectively. And one of my first conversations when I walked into this role was I was put onto a project as the test lead on that project, and I went to the project manager and said, "Okay, how do we get view of the requirements, and can I be involved in those meetings?" Oh no, we can't do that. We've got no money for QA to be involved earlier. You only get involved at the end of the project. That's when your budget's allowed. And it took me about 3 hours to calm down. because I knew that we could add value if we were involved earlier, but we were literally put in this box of you only get involved at that point. That's when you're allowed to get involved. So my next few slides, after I've talked about where we ended up, is what I tried to help move us to get us to that place. So yeah, this is what we ended up by the time I left, where we were at. And this is, we were seen as advocates for quality. We were a part of the puzzle that were as engaged as early as possible to build quality in. And we started providing value by highlighting issues early, or finding visible ways of showing why things were not good to go live. One particular example, we had this big software release where it had been going on for a couple of years. They were still finding bugs, and they were like, "Can we just get it out the door? We know there's a few bugs, but can we really just get it out now? Because we're fed up of having to work on this." And the testers were like, "I'm not sure we're good yet. There's issues definitely we can't go out yet." And I had to put this risk-based metric together that visually showed where the defects were in relation to the high-risk areas of the system, to actually get the business to go, "Yeah, okay, I can see it's not ready to go yet." So we were able to provide that value by giving them a visible demonstration of where the issues were and what the impact was, and that stopped us going live at that point. But then we had a plan to get from that point to get to a point we could go live. So yeah, how did we get there? For me, it starts with someone in the team being seen as the leader. That doesn't have to be the manager or the team lead. It's someone that feels they can drive a process and get the team on board. It's really about the team believing in that person, and that person being able to show their passion, and can he get the team bought into the values and the vision that they're working towards. And that leads on nicely to my testing values that I built a couple of years ago. I put these together as things that I try and compare where I am currently in my roles, or where the team is in, to where my beliefs are. And this is a very basic set of values, but I think it helps me ensure that we're on the right track. And I got the team believing in these and working towards these as kind of a mantra that we worked from. So testing being a mindset, it's not just about executing scenarios. It starts when a project starts. One bugbear for me is automation being considered as the silver bullet and everything can be automated. That should never be a consideration. And then testing is valued as highly as other disciplines within an organization. And once we got those on board and got the team building into those, we were able to start assessing what we needed to do to change the view of what we were doing. And that's where we came to a point of empowering them. So, giving them a safe to fail environment, giving them the confidence to talk about testing at any point, give them those opportunities to show their passion, celebrate any success they have. If they want to try out a new tool, let them try it, see if it works, give them the time to go and try that out. Don't restrict them and tell them it has to work first time, or, it's a waste of money, a waste of your time. Give them enough time to go and investigate stuff. Give them Blue Sky days or Google days, or whatever they're called, once a month or whenever, just to spend time innovating and coming up with new ideas. And soon you'll see that people are starting to flourish and improve the work they're doing. Find ways to engage them. So at both my current role and previous role, I've set up internal test communities. There's been an online group where we've been able to share blogs and podcasts and video talks and whatever else. And I've run the test community of practice, where we've had external speakers coming in and talking to the teams about testing in different forms. That picture at the bottom there is I got agreement to run a half-day testing conference internally, and I got 4 or 5 external speakers to come in and talk on different topics, from mental health, exploratory testing, upskilling testers, that kind of topics, and everyone went away feeling engaged. I also find that by me doing this kind of stuff as well, like talking to you today and doing external talks and podcasts, that gives the team impetus internally as well to start doing their own things in that area. So try and inspire them, try and get them interested in new stuff, and that can only help their development with internally as well. And then from that, find every opportunity to talk about quality testing at any opportunity within the business. So those two talks on the left, those two pictures on the left, they are different talks. I just have a very limited wardrobe apparently, where I talked about testing at a technology all hands. I talked about growing a culture of quality. I talked about our new test strategy. I talked about automation and what we could do to improve it. I talked about shift left and how we could bring some of the non-functional testing into the earlier models. We started blogging about what we were doing internally, which is the top right picture here. And I don't know if you're familiar with the TestSphere card deck, but using those in team meetings.
You mean these ones?
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, using those in team meetings where I'd push myself to be invited along to business meetings with other teams, like the technology teams, architecture teams, infrastructure teams, whoever they were. And I'd say, look, let's talk testing. And I'd just drop the cards on the table, spread them out into the different color piles and say, pick a card and we'll start talking. And, you know, they read the card and suddenly they realize there's a lot of stuff that we have in common, that we both have similar goals, similar aims between the testers and the infrastructure team or whoever. We spent 45 minutes with the infrastructure team talking about stability and how we could test that. So we found a common ground straight away. And you walk out of those meetings, the team are going, I didn't realize the testers knew that much. I didn't realize they could do that much. And so straight away, you're getting those allies that can then vouch for the quality of work that you can do. And that links nicely onto this. Right? So finding your allies is really key. I had one person that started coming to me going, so we're doing these small releases. We don't have any testers in the team, so I'm doing my own testing. And I'm finding that there's always production issues once it goes live. Can you spend some time with me and work through it? And I just sat down for an hour, drew out a combinatorial matrix of all the different parameters and how we could test it, and sent him on his way again. And he used that to help his testing going forward. He used it as a checklist almost to make sure he's covering everything off, but it worked. It gave him enough confidence that the releases were going to be okay. And actually he started not having the issues in production. And then he was like, hey, you should go and talk to the test team. They can help you with your work. And that straight away spread the word to other teams. And it's also then about finding ways to speak the language of the business. So talking about quality in a way that the business understands. So from my perspective, working for an airline, it's all about quality can be seen as, how do we get more people booking flights? How is our website looking the best possible way it can to encourage people to come in and book flights and book seats on holidays and whatever else. And that comes down to this diagram, which I love, from Louise Gibbs, who, the perceived quality model, where quality is what the person sees. So whether it's depending what they're looking at. So it could be from an aesthetic perspective, it's the front end UI. So what it looks like is seen as quality. If they're looking a bit deeper, it's more about the features that are, are the features working? Are they doing what they're meant to be doing? And then if you're looking at the lower level, it's, how does it work? Is it performant? Is it durable? Is it reliable? And all these can be perceived in different ways by different people. But trying to find a way to get those discussions with the business in the right language that they understand is really crucial to help things move forward. And then it's really, find ways to show the progress that the test team or the testers are making. So these are three things that I managed to work through, and we were able to demonstrate the value we showed, from putting the risk-based testing model in place, building out automation, looking at testability, making sure we have some kind of requirements testability review that helped us understand whether the requirements were testable, and giving everyone options to go back and bake quality in earlier rather than it being left to the end, and demonstrating this at all possibilities and every opportunity to share it and feedback with the wider teams. And with that comes the feedback. So it's not just about doing all this great work and going, there you go, that's what we're doing. It's about receiving that feedback from the people you're sharing it with, the wider business, and accepting their feedback and looking for surveys, to get surveys to send out to people and get their interesting feedback. Sorry, my son's just I'm in the annex.
It's okay.
Sorry. And sending surveys out to people and getting their feedback, and then sitting down and working through it with them. If it's not positive, then there will be ways to improve that and talk it through with them. We had a Costa coffee branch. She'll be back in a few minutes. We had a Costa branch of coffee in our office, so we used to take people down to there and talk to them and sit there and work through it with them and find out what they were suggesting, and then look at whether we could incorporate it into our work. And just having those regular conversations with people outside of testing actually improves the relationships and also improves the work we're doing. But I think the big thing for me is it's a journey, but it's not a journey with necessarily an end point either. So a culture doesn't have an end. So it's evolving that journey as you go along, trying to find ways to keep it going. There will be patches where things don't quite go to plan, but keep a focus. Don't give yourself too many changes to deal with at once. Try and move things forward in the right way. Take time to reflect regularly, and you will get to a point where you have a culture that everyone's building quality in earlier. And that comes to this model as well that I put together, which just is a circular view of what I've just talked through. Where you set the vision, you engage the team, you share their passion, you build the allies, and then you drive change through and iterate and reflect on that. And that's really what I had. So we can happily discuss through that a bit more if you wish.
So I am curious, how do you think this ties into shifting testing left?
So I think it's you get people bought into quality and the importance of quality, and by moving some of the opportunities to move things to the left and talk about it more and get people involved in discussions earlier. For me, shifting left is not just about finding ways to automate the testing. It's about those conversations and communications as early as possible, and getting the business buy-in that it's okay to have testers or quality people in early as possible makes that happen. So if you can build that culture where everyone understands the importance of quality and the real necessity for it, then the rest kind of falls into place because everyone's on the same page and everyone understands and everyone trusts the way the development and test teams are then going to work together. Is they're a lot more aligned. There's less barriers between them. You can start suggesting stuff to trial, like bringing an automation tool in to run accessibility testing or performance testing earlier within sprints rather than it being left to the end, which is something I'm working through at the moment. And it's just, you get less of a challenge because people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Actually, let's do that. Let's try it. And then you try it. It might not succeed perfectly first time round, but it does evolve the process and people start to see the benefits of doing more stuff up front or alongside the development or alongside the requirement generation or however the process works.
So here's my problem or concern with shift left testing is I think that the term shift left testing was based on the waterfall model where there's a beginning and then there's an end, and shifting left means moving testing closer to the beginning of a project or a cycle. But the reality with more agile and more modern methodologies is that testing should really be everywhere. There is no beginning and there's no end.
Yeah, and I think for me, shift left is probably the first step on the journey of shifting everywhere. I think there's a lot more concern around the whole shifting right process and shifting into production. There's a lot of fear around doing that. Sorry, my son's carrying my dog by its front paws.
It's okay. You don't have to apologize at all.
Shifting right, there's a lot of fear around testing in production for a lot of companies. But but finding ways to spread the testing out along the process and get more people involved from different areas of the business to understand that quality purpose. I think shifting left makes sense to be the first step, and then you look at how you can build it in along the way. And like you say, it's a continuous process. If there is still, I mean, I'm in an organization now where the teams on the ground are working in very agile, iterations. But from a company perspective, we still deliver end-to-end projects. So there's still a need for us to find ways to move earlier in our testing processes to bring that forward, to then make the testing in the sprints easier as well. Because of the way it works at the moment, we have several sprint teams all doing their own sprint work. And then we come together for this big bang regression, where all the teams do this regression testing phase at the end, where actually we should be shifting that into the sprints and having the teams all doing that collaboratively at the same time. And that will change the dynamics completely. And that's what we're trying to work towards at the moment. So I do get your point with the shift lefting, but I think it's almost the first step towards that continuous testing model.
Yeah, and I also like to think of it as it kind of depends on how you approach the whole what is a cycle, right? If you think of, instead of thinking of it as a cycle or a sprint or what have you, if you think of the actual waterfall that you have in mind, that being a specific feature or a ticket instead, and each of these tickets, even if you work agilely, they will go through a design phase, an implementation phase, a testing phase, and a release phase, right?
Absolutely.
And if you push the testing left in each of those those bursts of work, or each of those increments, then you'll probably get the benefit that we want from shift left testing. And one thing that people usually tell me, because I used to talk a lot about this with shift left testing and things like that on conferences, and one thing I usually heard was, but how can we test earlier? How can we test prior to any code being written, for instance? That's impossible because we don't have anything to test yet. But one thing that I probably stolen somewhere, but I don't remember where, is it's definitely fine to test even without having any code. You should involve the QA and the testers even in the design phase, and when you do the user journeys and you plan the UX and things like that, because you can always write out the whole user flow on a whiteboard and just simulate the flow and try to find errors there. That's a really valuable work as well that QAs definitely could contribute to more than they do today in many companies.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. It's any point where a piece of work is being identified, conceptualized, an idea being formed, there's place for someone to challenge it. There's place for someone to question it, to test it in the simplest form. And as that evolves, having someone that can challenge it side by side would really benefit the evolution of that into a solution that's got quality baked in as much as possible. So it would then reduce, as we say, reduce the phases later on, the need for big cycles of testing. A lot of the defects that we found earlier, even before code's written in some cases, and then you're building a better solution. The customers, the users, the business are more happy with that solution because it's evolved into something that's more stable than what they would have had originally.
I also love being involved earlier because I can also telegraph what I'm going to need. If there's a piece of work that will need a test environment with certain data in it, it's good to know that at the very beginning, because sometimes it takes a long time to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think even if you're not the one leading the requirements analysis, for instance, even if a tester's not the one leading it, a tester should be involved, because it's just, we are stakeholders for the requirements that are going to be drafted.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's again, we're a person that should be involved in that and having a say in how it's crafted and created. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Simon, what do you think this says about traditional roles? Does this mean that if we're shifting testing left, that you think all developers should learn to test, and should all testers learn to develop, to program?
I don't think it's that black and white. I think there's still a lot of, we can shift a lot of testing left. We can get people with a testing mindset involved earlier in the design and requirements. I think it also leads to having better automation in place, getting the fast feedback from that, enabling some of the non-functional tests to be done earlier as well. And then, exploratory testing as well. So I think there's still a definite need for testers in some form. Developers definitely need to have more understanding of what testing they can do from a shift left perspective, not just the unit testing, but how can they help build out test automation frameworks and working with the testers in the same way in crafting that as they would do crafting the code. And yeah, absolutely, there's a need for some testers to learn to code as well, to make that more even, that mix more even. But I don't necessarily think every tester needs to learn to code. I think there's enough other parts of the system that will need testers' role, whether it be requirements, testability, or design, or architecture, or the exploratory testing side.
What do you think, Simon?
I definitely agree. I don't see the role of the tester going anywhere anytime soon. I do think that it's always valuable to have more tools in your tool bag, right, or in your tool belt. So if you only have a hammer, then you're going to use that. So if you can learn how to code as well, or at least read code, I think you'll be better prepared to be able to test the software as well. I know Nicole and I have spoken on multiple occasions about black box testing versus white box testing, or whether or not you should have access to the source code while you test. And I'm definitely pro having access to it, because it will just will just allow you to do a much better job, right? Because you'll be able to see, okay, so what happens in this particular case, and how can I really try to exploit that, or make that crash or whatever, in as many ways as possible. And if you're not able to read code at all, then you'll have a much harder time to actually get to that point where you're able to test all the variations, so you're able to see any flaws in the code that might be easier to spot if you're able to read it. So I definitely think it serves a purpose, but I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think manual testing or exploratory testing is going anywhere anytime soon. People talk a lot about AI-based testing and having tests generated for them, but yet to see a tool that actually does that and is just not a marketing ploy for
that's always been my thing with AI. Anything that's AI based, it's not that it doesn't have value, but at the end of the day, it's still only as good as the person that's developed the code. So there's always going to be a need for testing at some level with that, and you can only trust it so far. There's always going to be the human element that still only comes from the mind of the people that are testing it. So yeah, absolutely agree.
And it's kind of similar, right, to the discussion we had a couple of years ago about IT operations and IT pros in the workplace, where we started to go more towards the cloud, and system operators were starting to get worried, will I still have a job? Will I be relevant in the future? And most of them still are, right? Because they'll move into other kind of roles where they have a more coaching capacity, or they'll be doing site reliability engineering or things like that instead. So I definitely think that the role is just going to evolve rather than disappear completely.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
I actually might have a more extreme opinion on this. I think every tester should know how to code, and I think every developer should know how to test. And the reason is that I think we all should have ideally we would have access to a doctor if we're sick, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't know some basics of health, right? It doesn't mean that we only think about it when we go to a doctor and they're the only ones that tell us what to do and what not to do. We should still generally know what's healthy and what's not, the right amount of exercise and whatnot. So I kind of think of it that way. I would not expect a tester to be able to be a developer and fill that role completely, but learning how to code, I think, is essential.
Definitely. I'm thinking it's still good to know you should not drink arsenic, right? And to know how to clean out a wound or apply a Band-Aid. Things like that are good to know, even though you don't have to be a surgeon to get use of them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is certain benefits in doing that, and the more cross collaboration we do, the better in some respects. I think there is definitely an argument there that it makes sense to have more blended roles or more blended skill sets. But I still think there's still a place for someone to be driving the testing mindset from a sort of test coach or test lead types perspective over a team of engineers who can do both. I think there's definitely a mix of roles. I think all the roles are evolving. It's just finding the right balance, really.
Well, it's good to be able to Google symptoms, medical symptoms, but it's not good to rely completely on webmd.com instead of your doctor, right? Sometimes you just need to go to a doctor.
Well, I mean, I don't know what it's like where you are, but we now have this NHS Ask NHS app that we have to use
Wow.
to book appointments with our doctors. We have to go through, and it's literally this virtual assistant who will ask you a series of questions. And you say what your first symptom is, then they ask a series of questions which are multiple choice, and you go through the options, and then you get to the end where they go, actually, no, you don't need a doctor's appointment. You just need to go to this website and do this, or yes, you need a doctor's appointment. We'll book you in straight away. Here's your next appointment, and then it comes back from the app. So you're right. It'd be good to be able to talk to that doctor at that point and not have to go through all that. But it's there's ways and means to try and make it work. So.
Like typing in "I have a headache" and getting a question, are all your limbs still attached to your body?
Exactly.
And I think it's also good to know, if you have that experience of coding, you also would know what the developer is going to ask for. Just like when you go to a doctor, you know that the doctor is going to ask, how long have you had these symptoms? Have you had any other symptoms with it? Like, you need to have these things prepared. You can't just go without anything. Just like you wouldn't just report a defect that's like, oh, the login functionality is not working. Well, what does that mean? How is that reproducible? What test data did you use? So if you have that mindset of development or that logic, that rigor around building an application, then it also helps you do your job better as a tester.
Yeah, definitely agree.
But it sounds like you don't completely buy into the whole thing of developer in test or software engineering, but rather like to nuance that a bit more. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just don't think it's that. I don't think it's that black and white. I think there's definitely a need for people developing and doing their own testing. I think there's the developer in test role. I think is still a very important role, and actively any testers that know automation is a benefit. But I still feel there's definitely a need for that human investigative side as well. And if that can't be done by the developers in test or the developers themselves, then we still need some more human cognitive based testers that can come in and do that part as well. But I definitely see there's definitely a need for more code technical people to do testing and development together. But I still think there's a need for that exploratory side as well.
I would really love for people to be talking more about the software tester in development as well, because that's something you rarely hear, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
One of my prior gigs, I guess, I worked in a team where we used to do mob programming all the time.
Okay.
That was the only practice that we used to develop code. So we were usually 4 or 5 persons sitting at one computer and developing code together. And one thing I really enjoyed about that was whenever we had a chance to get a tester on the mob as well and have them sit through what must have been tedious to them because we were just writing code, right? And go like, okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Should we add this? Should we add that? And be active in the whole development process, throughout writing the code, and not just coming at the end when we're like, okay, so this issue is done. Can you please have a look at this and give us some feedback? But have them challenge us as we write our code. I think that was really helpful for us as developers, but maybe not that fun for the actual tester.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely I've experienced the dev and test pairing working very well as well. So have the tester sort of doing that with a single developer. So I imagine the mob testing model would equally be just as beneficial, if not more exciting in some ways, because it does feel a lot more collaborative and informative doing it that way.
So let's talk more about software testers in development when we speak to people, because I think that makes
definitely.
I also really like still the concept of specialization, because I think it's different when everyone can do everything. Then who's looking at it from the point of view of a tester, who's looking at it from the point of view of a developer. I think those roles need to be ticked off. Someone needs to have that as a priority. So like when Sim and I are a dev test pairing, and I think that works really well, because when I give him something to review, like work that I've done, I know that even though he knows about testing, he's going to apply his development background more, because that's what I need.
Yeah.
That's the area that I'm lacking in. That's useful to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that jack of all trade, master of none, isn't it? That you worry that if you've got a team of blended engineers, that you won't have that specialism that's still focused, and will the quality therefore drop from doing that? It's having those specialisms in place, having that person that's advocating for quality or advocating for good code practices to make sure that everyone's putting things together in the right way. And then you've got the whole non-functional piece as well, where you look at making sure security or performance or accessibility are all included in that scope as well. So having people that understand those different specialisms still needs to be within that group that you've got working on a piece of code.
It actually ties in kind of nicely to the whole T-shaped knowledge concept.
Yes.
And about, having one specific topic that you're very knowledgeable in, but still being able to get by in a lot of other areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
I also wanted to mention neurodiversity, because I thought that was an interesting topic that you've blogged about quite a bit. Why do you feel so strongly about it, and what's its place in tech?
Well, it's as I mentioned, it's something there's a lot of neurodiversity plays a big part in my family, and it's something that I've grown up sort of understanding to some level. So it's something that I've always seen as had an awareness of, and my wife used to be a special needs teacher as well, so she worked with children with different neurodiverse conditions. So between us, there was a lot of discussions around neurodiversity within the household. And then growing up in tech, I see that there are a lot of people that would be good fits for tech roles who may be on the autism spectrum or with ADHD, that may find it difficult to work in the usual tech workplace. And it's just, my drive has been to try and find ways to make those roles, make those organizations more accessible to those with neurodiverse conditions by looking at the interview process, by looking at the application process, full stop, and then looking at the workplace as well. Obviously now we're in a more remote world where I don't think most of us will be going back to the office full time, but still there needs to be that flexibility that if someone has particular requirements with their work setup, maybe the lighting's too bright in their area, or the desks are near the canteen and there's really strong smells which can trigger someone with neurodiverse with autism or other neurodiverse conditions. It's about making sure that everyone is treated in the way they need to be treated in the workplace. It's not necessarily about everyone being treated in exactly the same way, because everyone has different needs, and it's enabling those people to have their needs met, and finding ways to do that. And my recent research has been more about the hiring process and how we make job specs accessible to all. Because the example I would give is if you have a job spec with 16 points of these are the must-have skills you must have for this role, and someone with autism comes and looks at that role and they think they tick off 14 of those, but not the 16, they won't apply.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel they match the role completely. Whereas actually that role may have only been 4 or 5 key points that are crucial and the rest were desirables. And therefore, you've lost out on someone who may have been a good fit for the role. So that's really where I am now. And I'm trying to build my research to develop my blogs and then hopefully get to a point where I can start talking about it at tech conferences as well, where, this is what we need to do to try and help move neurodiversity forward.
I'm just looking at our job description for a position that we're looking for. There are a lot of bullet points. Never really thought of that.
And I think that makes sense for getting, gender diversity and things like that as well.
Yeah, it does. It does. Definitely.
I remember I spoke to an acquaintance of mine, Ronna, who's really knowledgeable about how to bring gender equality to the workplace, or how to bring gender diversity at least. And she pointed out that if you have, as you say, a lot of requirements in your job ads, then you probably are just going to get white, male, neurologically normative, typical persons to apply, because they usually think, okay, so I don't tick off all of these things, but once they get to meet me, they'll see how great I am. But that's not true for most other applicants, right? So getting it down to the basic science or the basic requirements of what you actually need, and for instance, eliminating everything that takes less than 2 months to learn on the job, I think that really makes a difference in what what kind of diversity you'll see in your candidates while recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was going to say, it was interesting doing the research into job specs and people that are applying for it, because you do get, the variety of, there are certain groups that will apply to roles based on just the job title. They won't look at the job spec. They'll see a title and it's something they want to get to, so they'll apply for it regardless whether they've got the skills or not. And then, like you say, there's others that will only apply if they've got every skill that's mentioned. So it's interesting, the variety, and it's how do we match that to everybody's needs and make sure that we're getting the best possible teams we could build.
Definitely.
It's actually a documented statistic too, at least for the gender split. I was just looking it up. Men typically apply for a job after they meet 60% of the requirements, and most women will apply when they meet 100% of the requirements.
Exactly.
And I don't know, that's so true for me. I never apply to a job that I haven't done before. Maybe I need to push myself a little bit.
I think for me, I've always struggled with really visualizing what the job involves from reading a job spec. I want to learn more about the culture. I want to learn more about the people. I want to learn more about the company and where the role fits and what the role could evolve into. And I'm definitely more about, let's make the role spec about the core things that are needed, and then allow the person to come in and make the role their own. And everyone will approach a role in different ways and have different aspects that they excel in more than others. So if you've got core skills or core responsibilities that are needed with that role, make sure they're the bits that are mentioned in the spec, and then allow someone to come in and bring their own flavor to the role, bring their own dynamics, and maybe they do other things slightly outside of what the role entails. And it's about building that culture ad, not culture fit, really, to quote one of my testing peers co-hosts. It's about building a team rather than just looking at the individual role.
Yeah, I think James has a really good point here as well. Unfortunately, I'll add, many job specs are a hodgepodge of different people's opinions about the role. And I think that's really true. I mean, you have an HR department, you have a hiring manager, you have a
Yeah,
team,
you do.
etc., and they all have opinions on how the job ad should look.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not always positive, because it tend to end up too long or too complex for anyone to be able to fill.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
It's also because the people who are usually reaching out to candidates are usually like hiring HR people, or they're not the hiring manager, or they're not
Yeah.
the peers of the person you're trying to hire. So I think they rely too much on these criteria. You have to have 5 years of experience in this and 2 in that. Nobody really has that,
Yeah,
but they
exactly.
don't know what attitude they need to be looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why, I'm hiring for a test architect at the moment, and I'm trying to be as actively involved in the hiring process as at all levels, because I want to make sure we catch the candidates that their CV might not be quite right, but talking to them, etc., you find out enough about them to think, they would be a good fit. And you're right, understandably, those in the recruitment roles will look at what they have in front of them and be able to assess it from that. They won't have the technical knowledge to be able to work out whether that person actually has that experience or not. In those things, we need it.
Okay, I think we're out of time. I feel like all three of us could keep going on this topic
Yeah, we
for a
could,
while.
definitely.
We need to do another one on diversity and
Yeah.
different backgrounds.
Well, I'm more than happy to come back if you want me back.
Awesome,
You're always welcome.
definitely.
This was a really great conversation. Thank you for joining.
Anything you want to plug before we go?
No, well, just the podcast, really. Testingpeers.com or Testing Peers on any of the podcast apps. Give it a listen. Let us know what you think. Be really interested to hear more.
And if someone watching the stream would like to apply for the role that you were mentioning, where could they find your job ad?
LinkedIn's probably the best place, I think. Or LinkedIn, search for EasyJet. And there's the digital QA technical architect. It's the role I'm hiring for. Just reach out to me. I'll be able to point them in the right direction.
Awesome.
And someone in chat, James Leatherman, is also trying to get a K6 performance person. So hit him up if you think you might be that person, or if you know someone who might be.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the same goes for Simon Stratton, who's also looking for a K6 developer or a K6 tester. So feel free to reach out to him as well if you are curious about that.
Okay, well, thank you both for the chat. Thanks to people watching, and everybody have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Awkward hand wave.